Hello everyone, and welcome back to Sun Moon Audiobook, the channel where we share wisdom and inspiring book journeys to help you grow and develop your best self, inside and out. They say the heaviest chains are the ones you cannot see. Not made of iron, but of calendars filled with obligations, inboxes that never rest, and dreams deferred to a someday that never seems to come. You wake each morning and move through the motions, but somewhere deep inside, there's a quiet ache, the sense that you were meant for more than just surviving the cycle. It is into that ache that Timothy Ferriss speaks through the 4-Hour Workweek, not with lofty theory, but with live defiance. He was once caught in the same rhythm of endless striving, building and burning himself out, until he realized that freedom could not wait until the end of life. Freedom, he discovered, could be designed right now. And his voice is not the voice of a distant sage, but of someone who broke the invisible bars and chose to live differently, someone holding out the keys to those still waiting in the cage. What Tim discovered, and what he now shares with such raw defiance, is that the world's promise of work hard now, enjoy life later, is a mirage. The retirement plan, the 40-year career ladder, the badge of honor in being busy, it is a story that steals the present from millions. He asks you, what if you could live differently? Not one day, not when you're old, but right now. What if freedom was not the reward at the end, but the design of your life from the very beginning? It is a radical question, but also a profoundly human one. Because deep down, all of us ache for time, for meaning, for the breath of life not tethered to a screen or a paycheck. And he calls this the way of the new rich, not in money alone, but in wealth of time, of choice, of freedom to shape days as you dream them. The heart of his vision begins with the art of elimination. We are taught to believe that more work, more effort, more sacrifice is the path to success. But Tim flips this script. He reveals that most of what fills our hours is noise tasks that look important but yield almost nothing. He whispers the mantra that echoes like a soft but fierce rebellion. Less but better, less but truer. Through the lens of Pareto's law, the 80-20 principle, he shows how the majority of results come from a tiny fraction of effort. Imagine this in your own life. 80% of your stress and exhaustion comes from a handful of tasks or people, while most of your true rewards come from just a small slice of what you do. What if you learned to let the noise go? What if you released the weight of meaningless obligations and began to focus only on what really mattered? It would feel like cutting shackles from your ankles, finally walking light and free. It would feel like a return to yourself. And yet, elimination is not enough without courage. For so many, the prison is not only in tasks, but in fear. The fear of saying no, of disappointing others, of stepping off the treadmill everyone else insists you must run on. Tim offers a different frame. What if the worst-case scenario you dread is not nearly as catastrophic as you imagine? Most fears, when named, become small, almost manageable. It is the silence around them that gives them power. By daring to face those fears, by writing them down, by asking what's truly the worst that could happen if I tried another path, you begin to see that life is far more forgiving than you've been told. This fear setting, as he calls it, becomes a ritual of reclaiming power. And in that reclaiming, you find the freedom to choose, to step aside from what drains you, and to step into the spaces that light you up. The second great current in his philosophy is automation. The world is overflowing with tiny tasks that consume our days, like pebbles filling a jar, until there is no room left for what truly matters. Tim teaches the art of outsourcing, not just delegating to others, but liberating yourself from the illusion that you must do everything. He tells of virtual assistants, systems, and tools that can take on the burdens that weigh down your hours. But at its core, automation is not about efficiency, it is about dignity. It is about declaring that your attention, your presence, your soul, is too precious to be wasted on the trivial. The moment you let go of micromanaging every detail, you reclaim the possibility of living with space, with presence, with creativity. And you begin to realize that the true wealth is not in money earned, but in hours regained, in mornings unhurried, in evenings spent with laughter instead of exhaustion. Less but better, less but truer, the mantra returns. And then there is liberation, the final and perhaps most daring act. Liberation is the breaking of invisible chains, the refusal to wait for permission, the stepping into a life designed around freedom rather than conformity. Tim insists that you do not have to quit everything overnight or burn down your career to taste this. It begins in experiments, in testing new ways of living. Perhaps you negotiate working remotely. Perhaps you create a small side project that generates income while you sleep. Perhaps you learn to travel light and work from anywhere, carrying your life not in possessions, but in possibilities. Liberation is not a dream. It is a series of choices, small, radical, and utterly yours. And when you string them together, you wake one morning and realize you are living not for someday, but for now. You are already free. At this point, let me offer a small confession, one that still lingers in memory, like a scar and a gift. There was a season when I sat at a desk long after the sun had set, the glow of the screen the only light in the room. My body ached, my spirit even more, but I told myself this was success. This was the cost of ambition. Yet inside, there was a quiet breaking, a voice that whispered, "This is not life." Reading Ferriss in those nights was like someone opening a window in a suffocating room. The words gave me permission to imagine differently, to believe that freedom was not selfish, that joy was not a luxury, but the very essence of why we are here. It was not instant, it was not easy, but it was enough to remind me that life is too brief to be postponed. And isn't that the heart of it for you who are listening right now? Maybe you are tired. Maybe you feel bound by obligations that no longer feel alive. Maybe you wonder if this is all there is. Let me say gently, it is not. The cage is not locked. The 4-hour work week is not about doing nothing. It is about doing only what matters. It is about trading in the story of endless sacrifice for the story of intentional freedom. It is about building a life that feels wide, like a horizon you can breathe into, instead of a narrow tunnel you're forced to crawl through. Tim gives us stories of others who dared to live this way. Entrepreneurs who built businesses that ran without their constant hand, travelers who worked from hammocks in distant lands, even artists who, by simplifying their lives, discovered more time for creation. These are not fantasies. They are proof that another life is possible. Richard Branson himself has often said that business, when designed well, is an adventure, not a prison. He is one of many who chose to build freedom into the structure, not wait for it at the end. But freedom does not arrive all at once. It arrives in small steps. Perhaps for you, it means pausing today to ask, what are the 20% of things in my life that bring me 80% of my joy? And which are the 20% that bring me most of my stress? Begin there. Let go of one. Reclaim a single hour. Taste the sweetness of space and let it remind you of what is possible. Because once you taste freedom, you will not forget it. Once you glimpse that your life can be designed, not endured, you will never settle again. Halfway through this journey, it is natural to feel conflicted. You may wonder, is it irresponsible to let go of what the world insists is responsible? Will people judge me if I choose differently, if I step away from the treadmill of busyness? And the truth is, yes, some might. But remember this, you are the one who lives your life, not them. You are the one who wakes up in your skin, who carries your own exhaustion, who dreams your own dreams. And if your life does not feel like your own, what else is there? This is not about rebellion. For rebellion's sake, it is about coming home to yourself. The mantras return again. Less but better, less but truer. And so the journey continues with one of the most tender truths that Ferriss offers, the idea of mini retirements. For so long, we are taught that retirement is a finish line, something you collapse into after decades of work. But what if, instead, you sprinkled little retirements throughout your life? Moments, months, even years where you step away, not to wait until your body is too weary, but while your spirit is still vibrant. Tim himself traveled the world, learning dance in Argentina, martial arts in Japan, finding life in cultures that refused to measure worth by hours worked. These pauses are not an escape, but a return away to realign your days with what matters most. Imagine taking 3 months to live in a different country, to learn a craft, to simply breathe without rushing. Wouldn't that fill your life with stories, with richness, with memories that matter more than any spreadsheet or quarterly goal? It is not indulgence, it is nourishment. But if this feels impossible, remember that impossibility often hides behind old assumptions. We assume money is the barrier, but what if money is not the true currency? The real wealth is time. Many of the experiences we crave do not require millions. They require courage, creativity, and the willingness to step outside of routine. Tim reminds us of arbitrage, the quiet strategy of choosing places where your money stretches further, where you can live richly without being rich. A simple shift in location can transform your entire experience of freedom. And beyond location, it is the recognition that life can be designed around meaning instead of around accumulation. He asks you to imagine, if you had 10 times the money you do now, what would you actually do differently? Most discover the answer is not as grand as they think. It is often the same. More time, more presence, more experiences that make the heart swell. And if that is true, perhaps you don't need the millions first. Perhaps you can begin today. Another thread woven through his wisdom is the art of selective ignorance. In a world overflowing with noise, emails, news, updates, distractions, the mind becomes a cluttered attic, full but not alive. Tim dares you to close the door on most of it. To stop reading every headline, to stop responding to every ping, to stop believing that constant connectedness is required. He shows how the constant flood of information does not empower, but enslaves. True freedom often begins in silence, in choosing what you will allow into your mind. And this is not about indifference. It is about discernment. Your attention is your most precious resource, and if you spend it on noise, there is nothing left for creation, for love, for presence. By stepping back, you begin to hear yourself again. You rediscover clarity. And with clarity comes courage. For those who worry that this path is selfish, Ferriss offers a different perspective. When you are free, when you are living with intention instead of exhaustion, you become more generous, not less. You have time to give, energy to share, creativity to contribute. The 4-hour work week is not about withdrawing from life, but entering it more fully, more awake, more alive. It is about breaking the pattern of waiting for someday and daring to live as though today matters. Because it does. Today is the only place life ever happens. And there is another mantra he returns to. Test, do not assume. We are so quick to accept the rules handed to us that a job must look a certain way, that success requires a certain sacrifice, that life must follow a certain order. But Tim insists, test it. Try working remotely for a week and see if the world falls apart. Try outsourcing one task and see if freedom grows. Try living in another country for a month and see if you feel more alive. Life is not a static formula, it is an experiment. And you are the experimenter. This mindset of testing rather than accepting turns fear into curiosity and makes change less overwhelming, because you do not have to leap into the unknown forever. You only need to take the next step and see what happens. There is a beautiful humility in this. It is not about grand declarations, but about living in alignment with what is true for you. For some, that may mean traveling the world, building businesses that run on autopilot. For others, it may mean simply reclaiming evenings for family, weekends for creativity, mornings for stillness. The form does not matter. What matters is that your life feels like yours, not a script handed to you by others. That is the liberation Ferriss speaks of. Not one-size-fits-all freedom, but the kind that comes when you live as though your days are your own. Think for a moment of those who embody this. There are artists who left corporate jobs to paint and found that by simplifying their needs, they created more than ever. There are writers who travel the globe, writing from cafes, sustained not by endless wealth, but by lean freedom. Even great innovators like Elon Musk or Jack Dorsey have used the principles of automation and focus to multiply what matters most, though in their own ways. The form is flexible. The principle is constant. Life is too precious to postpone. But here, in the middle of this reflection, I want to pause with you, to acknowledge the heaviness you might feel as you listen. Because it is one thing to hear these ideas, and another to believe they can apply to you. You may think, my obligations are too heavy, my family depends on me, my situation is different, and in some ways, you are right. Your story is unique. But within that uniqueness lies possibility. Even small steps matter. Even tiny experiments in freedom are acts of rebellion against a culture of delay. And each act reminds you that life is pliable, not fixed. You are not as trapped as you feel. The cage is not locked, and hope is not far. What Ferriss offers, more than strategies, is permission. Permission to live now, not later. Permission to let go of what does not matter. Permission to believe that freedom is not just for the lucky few, but for anyone willing to choose it. And maybe that is what you need most right now, not another blueprint, not another checklist, but the gentle assurance that you are allowed to live differently. That the whisper inside you is not foolish, but sacred. That your longing for freedom is not weakness, but truth. So, let us continue walking through this vision together, deeper into the heart of what it means to reshape a life. Tim Ferriss often describes the world we live in as one where the default is unexamined. People wake, work, consume, and repeat, as though there were no alternative. But the new rich, the ones who embrace this path, are those who dare to ask questions no one else is asking. What if work was not the center of your life? What if your worth was not tied to hours logged? What if success could be measured not in titles or possessions, but in stories lived, relationships nurtured, experiences embraced? To live in this way is to step out of the current of the crowd and into the quiet river of intention. And while the crowd may call it reckless, you may discover it is the only way to feel truly alive. One of the most striking elements of Ferriss's approach is his insistence on clarity. He invites you to define your dreams with specificity, not vague wishes. Too often we say we want freedom, but what does that mean for you? Is it the ability to work 3 days a week and spend the rest with your children? Is it the chance to write, to travel, to learn? Clarity turns longing into possibility. Without it, freedom remains a blurry idea on the horizon. With it, freedom becomes something you can begin shaping with your very next choice. He suggests designing your ideal lifestyle first, then asking what income and systems would support it, rather than the other way around. And this reversal is powerful. Instead of money being the goal and life the afterthought, life becomes the goal and money the servant. Imagine how differently your days would unfold if you built them around what makes you feel most alive. And this clarity extends to the concept of what Tim calls dreamlining. It is the practice of taking your wildest dreams, the things you think are too extravagant, too bold, too far away, and breaking them into actionable steps. Perhaps you dream of sailing, or learning a language, or launching a business. Instead of burying those dreams under the weight of someday, dreamlining asks you to cost them out, to research them, to realize that often they are more attainable than you imagined. So many people assume they need millions before they can live their dreams, but Ferriss dismantles that illusion with math and courage. A year of travel might cost less than a year of living in your current routine. A language course abroad might be cheaper than the distractions you spend on monthly. The real barrier is not money, it is permission. And once again, the theme returns. You are allowed. Another gift of this philosophy is how it reframes failure. Most of us are conditioned to fear mistakes, to avoid risk, to cling to what is safe. But Ferriss paints failure in another light as feedback, as learning, as simply part of the experiment of life. When you see failure not as catastrophe, but as information, you free yourself to try, to step forward, to create. you discover that the true danger is not in falling, but in never leaping at all. And often, the worst-case scenario is survivable. You lose a little money, a little time, maybe some pride, but you gain perspective, resilience, wisdom. Failure becomes the soil in which freedom grows. And so, he urges us not to fear the fall, but to fear the paralysis of never daring. Tim also offers a radical perspective on work itself. He does not despise work. He despises meaningless work. He honors the work that creates value, that matters, that multiplies life rather than diminishes it. The 4-hour work week is not about laziness, it is about precision. It is about crafting systems so that your energy goes into what only you can do and letting go of the rest. It is about becoming the architect of your labor, not its servant. And in that shift, work becomes lighter, more aligned, more like play. Think of the child lost in building a castle of blocks. So absorbed they forget the clock. That is what work can feel like when it is true to you. And when it is not, the courage is to redesign, to automate, to outsource, to step back until your work becomes an expression rather than a burden. To make this real, Ferriss gives example after example of ordinary people who embraced extraordinary choices. There was the entrepreneur who built a small online business and, through automation, managed it with a few hours a week, freeing the rest for travel. There was the employee who negotiated remote work and found himself living in a different country every few months, still doing his job, but on his own terms. These are not fantasies. They are blueprints. And though your path may look different, the underlying truth is universal. Life is more flexible than you've been told. Systems can bend. Rules can be rewritten. Freedom is not a lottery prize. It is a design. And perhaps the most tender lesson in all of this is that time is not guaranteed. To postpone life until some distant future is to gamble with something you may never reclaim. We have all heard stories of those who worked tirelessly for decades, only to find their bodies too weary or time too short to enjoy the retirement they saved for. And Ferriss asks us, why wait? Why not sprinkle joy, adventure, freedom throughout the journey? Why not taste retirement now, in small doses, instead of gambling on a someday that may never come? It is not reckless. It is responsible. Because life is now. Because you are alive now. And because the clock is always ticking and no one knows how many beats remain. You, listening right now, may feel both the ache of longing and the sting of fear. You may feel resistance rising in you, whispering, "This is not for me. This is for others." And yet, maybe some part of you knows that you cannot ignore the whisper forever. You deserve a life that feels like yours. You deserve mornings that do not fill you with dread. Evenings that are not only about recovery, but about joy. You deserve to be free. And though the path may look daunting, remember, it begins not with a leap, but with a step. A single choice, a single test, a single moment of courage. And as the journey unfolds further, there comes a moment where Ferriss asks us to confront the invisible chains we have wrapped around ourselves, the assumptions that bind us far more tightly than any external circumstance. He points to the cultural addiction to busyness, how so many wear exhaustion like a badge of honor, as though suffering were the proof of worth. But busyness, he reminds us, is often just avoidance in disguise, avoidance of the hard questions, avoidance of the deeper work of designing a life that is truly our own. We stay busy so we don't have to admit that much of what we do doesn't matter. And when you see that clearly, it can feel unsettling, even painful, because it shines a light on years spent running in circles. Yet this clarity is a gift. It allows you to finally ask, what if I stopped? What if I let go? What if I created space, not filled it? The courage to be unbusy, to be deliberate, to rest, is itself a radical act of freedom. Ferriss also invites us to examine how much of our identity is tied to approval. How often do we say yes because we are afraid of letting others down? How often do we follow a path not because it calls to us, but because it impresses others? This pursuit of external validation keeps countless people locked in jobs, routines, and lives they secretly resent. And so he urges us to practice saying no, not harshly, but firmly. Not with cruelty, but with clarity. Every no is a yes to something truer. Every no is a doorway back to yourself. And though it may feel uncomfortable at first, it is in this discomfort that liberation begins. To live a life aligned with your own values rather than the expectations of others is one of the most tender, daring things you can do. And then comes the reminder that freedom is not about escape, but about alignment. Some imagine that leaving work behind means drifting into aimlessness, but Ferriss shows that true freedom is deeply intentional. It is about choosing what to do with your time, not simply being free from obligation. It is about living as though your days are art you are creating, rather than burdens you are carrying. For some, this might mean travel and adventure. For others, it might mean building, creating, serving, teaching. The form is yours to choose, but the heart is the same. To live as though your life is yours to shape, not something dictated to you. And this idea resonates when we look at those who have embodied it in powerful ways. Think of Richard Branson, who built businesses not just to profit, but to fuel his spirit of adventure, from hot air balloon crossings to island living. Think of J.K. Rowling, who, after years of hardship, designed her life around writing stories that mattered to her, and in doing so gave the world magic. Their paths were not smooth, but they were chosen, and that is the thread chosen. They built their lives as though they were the architects, not the prisoners, and you too are invited to do the same. But Ferriss does not shy away from the emotional valleys of this journey. He knows that freedom requires sacrifice, that letting go of the familiar is frightening. You might have to face disapproval, uncertainty, and the discomfort of stepping into the unknown. And here he offers the reminder that courage is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act alongside it. Fear will not vanish, but it can shrink when you refuse to let it rule you. And over time, each step you take weakens the hold of that fear until it no longer defines your choices. This is why he urges us to practice fear-setting, writing out our worst fears, naming them, examining them. Because once they are named, their shadows lose their power. At the center of all this is a redefinition of success. Success is not the biggest house, the longest title, the fullest bank account. Success is the ability to live your values in real time. Success is mornings filled with peace, days spent in work that matters, evenings alive with laughter or stillness. Success is measured in freedom, not in busyness. And when you shift your definition, your choices shift too. You begin to see that you don't need to chase the same markers everyone else is chasing. You can create your own. And in doing so, you reclaim the most precious thing you have, your life. This reframing asks us to step into responsibility of a different kind. Not the responsibility of meeting endless demands, but the responsibility of designing a life that is true. Because if you do not design your life, someone else will. If you do not choose your path, you will end up walking theirs. And this, more than anything, is the tragedy Ferriss wants us to avoid: reaching the end of our days, only to realize we lived someone else's script. To prevent that is the deepest work of all. To choose your script, to write it with intention, to live it boldly. That is the essence of freedom. And so we arrive at a gentle challenge: to begin now. Not someday, not after everything is perfect, but now. Begin with the question: what would my life look like if it were wide open? Begin with a step. Let go of one obligation that drains you. Begin with an experiment. Test one small way of living differently. These steps may seem small, but they carry the seeds of transformation. Like drops of water, they ripple outward until the whole shape of your life begins to change. And one day, you will look back and realize you are no longer waiting for freedom. You are living it. And now, as the threads of this vision weave tighter together, Ferriss offers perhaps the most life-altering truth of all: that freedom is not something distant, but something practiced daily. It is not the grand gesture of quitting everything overnight, but the consistent rhythm of choices that honor your soul over your fear. Each morning is an invitation to step into alignment. Each evening a chance to ask whether you live this day as though it were truly yours. This is not theory, it is practice. And practice is what reshapes a life. He reminds us again of the power of constraints. Most people believe that having unlimited options is the key to happiness. But in reality, it is constraints that set us free. By narrowing focus to what matters most, by limiting tasks to only the essential, by choosing deliberately instead of endlessly chasing, you create a container for a life that feels spacious. It is paradoxical, but true. Freedom grows from boundaries. A tree only grows strong because the soil holds its roots. Likewise, your freedom is strengthened when you let go of the clutter and embrace what is essential. Less but better, less but truer. The mantra circles back again, soft but insistent. And within this simplicity lies creativity. How many dreams have withered not because they were impossible, but because we were too busy to nurture them? How many ideas never bloomed because the soil of our attention was too crowded with weeds? When you create space by eliminating, by automating, by refusing the unnecessary, creativity rushes in like sunlight through an open window. This is why Ferriss emphasizes that your time is the most valuable resource you own. Protect it, guard it. Spend it not on noise but on what brings life. Because one day, time will run out. And the only question will be, did you live it well? In this way, the 4-hour work week becomes less a manual for work and more a manifesto for living. It asks us to see that the structures we take for granted, the 40-hour week, the ladder of promotions, the distant retirement, are not laws of nature. They are choices, cultural agreements, and agreements can be rewritten. This is what makes his message so radical and so hopeful. You are not trapped by circumstance nearly as much as you are trapped by imagination. If you can imagine a different life, you can begin to build it. If you can question the rules, you can begin to write your own. And yet, he does not romanticize the path. There will be resistance not only from within, but from others. People may not understand. They may project their fears onto you, criticize your choices, even try to pull you back into conformity. But this too is part of the journey. Liberation often unsettles those who have chosen the cage. And so, Ferriss reminds us to stand firm, to trust the quiet knowing within, to surround ourselves with those who support our vision rather than those who diminish it. Because who you walk with matters. The voices you allow into your life shape the courage you carry. At the same time, Ferriss insists that this freedom is not selfish. On the contrary, when you live fully, you give more fully. A person who is free, rested, and aligned has more to offer the world than one who is drained and resentful. A person who chooses their life inspires others to do the same. Your freedom is not just for you. It becomes a light for others stumbling in the dark. Think of how many have been inspired by those who chose differently, from digital nomads, building businesses abroad, to creators who designed lives of simplicity and joy. Their courage ripples outward, showing others what is possible. And perhaps your life, lived authentically, could be that ripple too. Ferriss also emphasizes the beauty of experiments over commitments. So many people are paralyzed by the idea that they must know exactly what they want, that one wrong move will ruin everything. But what if life was not about permanence, but about trying, tasting, adjusting? What if each season was an experiment? This mindset dissolves fear, because experiments cannot fail, they only teach. And with each experiment, you learn more about yourself, about what freedom means to you. Over time, these experiments accumulate into a life that feels more and more aligned, until one day, you realize you are no longer testing freedom. You are living it. And so the invitation circles back to you, listening in this quiet moment. What experiment could you begin today? Perhaps it is as simple as turning off notifications for a week, or saying no to one meeting, or exploring the cost of a dream you've long delayed. Perhaps it is asking yourself, what would I do if I could not fail? Or even softer, what would I do if I gave myself permission? These questions are small, but they open doors. And behind each door lies a little more space, a little more possibility, a a little more freedom. Ferriss closes his philosophy not with a demand, but with an invitation, the same invitation I want to leave with you. To see life not as a race to the end, but as a canvas for joy, freedom, and meaning. To remember that the clock is ticking, but not to scare you, to remind you that today matters. That right now matters. That this moment, even as you listen, could be the moment you decide to stop postponing and start living. And so, let me leave you with this image. Imagine a sunrise over a still lake. The world is quiet. The water reflects the sky. And in that stillness, you realize something profound. Life is waiting, always waiting, for you to step into it. You do not need to earn it. You only need to choose it. And with each choice, the sun rises a little higher, the light grows a little warmer, and the day ahead becomes yours to create. That is the promise, that is the challenge, and that is the gift of the 4-hour work week. If this message has stirred something in you, I invite you gently, carry it forward. Share it with someone who might need the reminder. Leave a comment about what freedom means to you, or a dream you are ready to stop postponing. Subscribe if you want to keep walking these paths of reflection together. Your voice, your presence, your engagement, it matters more than you know. Because when you share your journey, you remind others that they too are not alone. And perhaps that is the truest wealth of all.